Hello, this is Mihai, and for today we're going to do a use case about getting data from a database with files for customers and sending those files to the appropriate customer via email after downloading the files from an FTP server. So let's get going. The process is going to be quite straightforward. We're going to create a process, give it a name, and let's call it get files from FTP send to email. Perfect. Now let's start. The first thing that I like to do when I build a process is actually draw the process first of all and then configure it. So what I need to do is, as I mentioned, get the files from a database. The information regarding the files from a database, and I'm going to use the execute query action from here. And after that, I'm going to iterate through those files, through the information regarding the files. And for iterating, I'm going to use the for each action. And for each of the files that I want to download, I'm going to use the FTP action that actually downloads the files. Now, after I download the file, I want to add the file to a list of files, because after adding this to a list of files, I'm going to send the list of files to the email. And you will see in a second why I need the list, because I need to add the variable here, and this is a list of files, because sometimes you will want to add to the list of attachment multiple files. That's why you need this to be a list of files. And given the fact that you might have multiple items here to loop through, and you have added the file to a list of files, you would want to empty that list of files for the next iteration to take place. And for that, we're going to use the map process data to empty the list of files. And you will see in a second what you need to do. So this is the process, quite straightforward. Now let's configure it. We will do it in the same order. First of all, execute query. We're going to select SQL credential. I already have SQL credentials predefined here in my workspace. You will have to create it yourself. Now you will have here a configuration panel, execute query, where you need to configure two parameters. The first one is the query itself, and the second one is the output of the query. Where do you want to store that data coming from the database? I like to first define the variable, so I'm going to define the output. It's a list of objects, but I know that this object is actually going to be a JSON, so I'm going to define it as db, or how should I say? I could call it list, no, file list from db. Okay. And it's going to be, as I mentioned, I'm going to have it as a JSON. It's already defined as a list. Create variable, and I'm now just have to create the query. So in any scenario, you can create this like as standard SQL query, or you could have a store procedure or whatever. Because I haven't prepared the database, I'm actually going to have select that I'm going to build it right now. Select, and let's say I need an email. And give it an alias and say an email, and I need a file which would be the PDF, which is the file name that I want to send, and this should be in the FTP. That's file path, and that's it, I suppose. Nothing else. If I want multiple files, and so I'm going to have basically the same select with 2 items. This is the simplest way to simulate a query from the database. So I will have the file list here. So let's see what happens. I can test the action. Good. And I have the output. And I can use this output to create a data model to make it easier for me to work with. Now I will have to basically, instead of this JSON, I'm going to have a list of data models. So in order for me to work easily with the data, I can leave it as it is, but you will see it's much easier to define a data model. So I will go to data models, create a JSON. I will call it list of files, edit, paste it, and it doesn't like it to be an array, so you will have to leave only one item of data. Then click preview data model. Feel free to pause the video and figure it out for yourself. I'm going to go a bit faster, but feel free to pause the video. Now I have created the list of files data model, and now I'm going to go back to the variable, so the variable that I have defined, and I can search for list of files, which is basically the data model that I have just created. And by creating a data model, it allows me, as you can see here, it's not JSON anymore, it's list of files. By creating a data model, it allows me to access the individual attributes of that data model. It's not a JSON anymore. If it were a JSON, I could have accessed that list of attributes, but I would have had to use the JSON mapper action to extract each of the values that I want to work with. It's easier the way I did it, so keep that in mind. Now let's go to the next action. I'm going to look in the list files. As you can see, it already sees the data model and the attributes in that data model. I'm going to give it a timeout of 0, which means indefinite. For each of the action, I will give it a file name, so it will know that every item in this list, it is going to store the data in the variable called file. You will see this file variable here as read only because it's created automatically from the for each action. And now I'm going to download the file. I need to select the credential for the FTP. I already have predefined credentials here. Source folder. I'm going to, I don't know how is it, okay, so I already have the FTP prepared, so source folder is this one. File name, I'm going to use the variable file path, and the result, which should be a file, I'm going to create a variable called file of type file, create variable. Okay, yes, it is file from FTP, create variable. So this action is already defined. I cannot test this action, as you can see. So I have been able to test the query action, the SQL query action, but I cannot test the download action. So I will have to try this action as I run the process. Then list add, I'm going to create a variable which will be attachment list variable of type file. and it's going to be a list. As you can see, it automatically checks the appropriate radio button because it knows from where you have added the variable, and then I'm going to add the file from FTP variable to the list, and then I'm going to go here and make sure that I reset the attachment list with this value. This value basically means an empty array, so it cleans the list of files, so I have a clean list of files for the next iteration. If I do not do this operation, then the second iteration is going to send the files also from the initial iteration, from the previous iteration. So we don't want that. We don't want to send the files from other clients to your clients. Cool. So let's configure the send email action. You will need to select the credential. I already have predefined credentials. You can have here basically anything from Gmail, from private SMTP servers, from Outlook, it doesn't matter. Each of them have their own particular configuration. So let's do this. As you can see, this is not, this is an optional field. The fields that are mandatory are marked appropriately, but I will give it a name here. I'm going to send this email to the file email. Basically, this is the variable that I named here. I will change it because it's not that obvious. I will give it file email current iteration. Hopefully this will be more intuitive. You can see here that it already changed the name. Subject, your files are here, whatever. Please find your files attached. Actually, it would be only one file, but you can model this process so that you can send multiple files if this is the case. And add the attachment, which is this one. Validate the process. It's perfect. If you would have problems with the process, you will get errors. Save the process, run the process, and let's see what happens. Okay, I have a problem while downloading the folder. Obviously, I do not have the files, right? So let's see which are my files, which are the files. So I should have an attachment.pdf. Let's see if I can find a PDF. Really fast. Okay, so I will use this one, okay? And I will add it to the FTP. I will rename it. What's the name? Is this one? Okay. And the next one. Okay, it worked. Okay, so let's try it again. Run the same input parameters. Let's see if it did the trick. It didn't. So it means I might have misconfigured something. Okay, let's do something else because it's not clear to me something. Okay, so I will test this one. I will for the moment create a variable just to test something. Okay, so the problem was that I didn't define the appropriate path for this, so I would have to basically define the entire path here, and that's what I'm going to do. Now I delete this. I will delete the variable that I just created, and you can see here that you see that it's not used, so I can delete it, save the process, and run it again. This should do the trick, and this should work perfectly. Oh, sorry, I forgot to check the instance. This is the instance. As you can see, it's successful. It did what it was supposed to do. So now let's see. As you remember, I wrote the same email address, so I should receive the email immediately. Sure enough, here it is. 2 freshly received emails, both with the appropriate attachment. And basically that's it. Easy enough, right? Looking forward to see what you build with this.